So I start my little welcome speech. So welcome to the third brown bag, virtual brown bag lunch. I hope you don't get a virtual lunch, but a real lunch. Today, Karen Arnold is presenting, and we are very, very happy to have her because she has done amazing work on essentially text messaging analysis with specific population that she's going to introduce to you and what they were all about. And when I first read about this publication, I just was so amazed that that I can learn new things every day, and that I have been at Boston College for almost 3 years now, and I learn something new every day. Just yesterday, I talked with somebody else from the math department, and I really realized that it's extremely important to really look across the aisle, not only within the School of Education, even across departments. We will find many, many colleagues who could become very dear collaborators and outstanding consultants and advisors, because I think the type of expertise that we collect here at the school is really just amazing. So and I really enjoy doing this brown bag lunch. I should talk about next year actually in that context. So we had 3 talks this year, and Karen is our grand finish line here for this year. Unfortunately, we don't have anything set up in December, which is always difficult, of course. Unfortunately, we can also not do anything in January, which also tends to be a short month. But then we will restart in February, and we will have again internal speakers as well as a few external speakers and continue the series. So thank you very much for showing up, and then let's all be very carefully listening to what Karen will tell us, and she will share her screen and take it from here.
Thank you, Matthias. Let me share my screen. And go into presentation mode. Is that showing well, or are you seeing the presentation mode itself?
We see your mode, your presentation. Now we see it.
Okay, perfect. So hello, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to hear what I've been up to. I thought I'd start by telling how I got on this panel. It was the classic case of you ask a question and you end up on a committee. So what happened is I spoke up and asked a question to a guest speaker, Zachary Collier, last spring, who was talking about a very different kind of text messaging than I did. And 2 things happened. One, he said, well, gosh, that's interesting what you're doing. I don't know anything about that. And the second was that Matthias contacted me and said, wow, I didn't know you were doing this. And that and I pulled up the email. He said he was seeing that natural language processing and text mining are starting to be used more and more in areas that traditionally have been separated, qualitative and quantitative areas of educational research. So that really, I think, will be an important part of what I can bring to this conversation. What I can't bring is really what the previous 2 speakers have done. I am not a methodology scholar, and we've had some very learned talks from psychometricians who have needed to score large amounts of unstructured texts, written responses, and are also moving into automatic item generation using AI methods. That is not what I'm doing. Rather, I am a content specialist. I'm a professor of higher education who studies college access of low-income, first-generation, other underrepresented students in higher education. And I backed into text mining by necessity. And I'll tell you the data set that got me there. But I'm still asking the kinds of questions a qualitative researcher would ask, questions about how and why and what's the lived experience of people. Those are different kinds of questions than primarily quantitative methodologists ask. And in particular, I think the mixed methods is really important at the point of having these big interventions in which you figure out whether they work or not. And then you need the qualitative people to say what's going on and why or why not do we see the effects that we hoped to see. So let's see. Whoops, my slides are, there we go. So this project that I'll use as the example of how I'm using text mining, I was the qualitative lead on a big IES grant with the cheesy title DIMES, Digital Information, what is it? Digital Information Messaging to improve college enrollment and success. And here you see the list of multi-institutional researchers who were working on this. And I added at the end the graduate assistant, Jonathan Lewis, who interestingly ended up at the organization as their director of research that delivered the intervention, but really needs to be recognized because he did a lot of the text mining. So in this project, we provided individualized advising to college intending low-income students across the country. And I want to just start with why we did that. Some of you are super aware of this. I think most of us through the media and being education scholars are at least somewhat familiar that one of the most intractable and important problems in society, and certainly in higher education, is inequality in college access and degree attainment. So the access and persistence of low-income students, many of whom are also BIPOC, is a huge problem. And we've been studying this for decades, and we know a lot about why this is happening, lots of interacting factors. So we've got good understanding of how money and academic readiness and community peer relationships and parents, all of those things, but we really don't know what to do about it. So the field has really been moving toward interventions to try to make a difference. And in particular, we are now trying to study scalable interventions. So IES was deeply interested in a big study of low-touch technology-assisted advising for low-income students. And that kind of intervention is in the tradition of behavioral economics nudging. That someone receives, in this case, a text message reminding them that tax day is April 15th and it's Tuesday. And so the first iteration nationally was researchers trying one-way texting. Hey, Joey, the deadline for signing up for the SAT is this Tuesday, and here's a link to register. And unfortunately, we've pretty much established that that doesn't work to increase college access. It might help to remind diabetics when to take their insulin. I don't know about that, but it's too bad that that one-way informational in time short little nudges don't really help, because it would have been incredibly cost effective. So this project was the largest one to date, maybe the largest one ever, to try two-way texting with professional advisors who were centrally located and not already connected to the students in their schools or their communities or their college prep programs. So we had this big quantitative team asking the usual questions about engagement rates and, most important, whether the intervention made a positive difference in immediate post-high school college enrollment and kind of enrollment, like 2-year versus 4-year enrollment. So I'll keep you in some suspense about whether or not the intervention worked. But if I don't get back to that, please remind me at the end to tell you what happened. My job was to figure out what was going on within the advising conversations to explain how or why this intervention, this campaign resulted in whatever outcome we found. So here's a kind of a flow chart of the project. At the end, I've got a slide including the major paper that just came out in an economics journal about the intervention and its outcomes. So basically, we had 750 high schools in 15 states. All of those had a high rate of low-income students who were eligible for free and reduced lunch and low four-year college going. We had several partners, most importantly, the College Board, which provided us with contact information and in-school sign-up for students who were taking in-school PSAT tests in their junior year. So we yielded 75,000 students, 80,000 students, and they were divided randomly into a treatment and control group of roughly 35,000 each. And then they received 15 months of these one-to-one text messages. After signing up for the PSAT, if I were Joe's advisor, I would email him and say, hi, or text him, excuse me, I'm Karen, I'm your advisor. Remember you signed up for this, and off we went. And I'll tell you a little bit about what the text messages were like in a sec. And the text messages, the advising was all delivered by an organization called You Aspire, which is bi-coastal. It's around the country, and it's one of the leading college advising organizations. So they had a special staff just for this, who each had a region and a caseload of about 400 students. And so you did have a human being who was your advisor and had some specialization in your region and the associated colleges. Meanwhile, the control group, we would have liked for them to have nothing more than business as usual. College Board required that they had some one-way testing. So they got a once-a-month nudge saying, interested in the SATs, click here, and they would get some information. And they did keep, the quantitative team, some records of how many students in the control group clicked and whether they clicked to increasing more information. And I can say in general that they did very little. So the control group was mostly business as usual, but not completely. And so then, remember, my job was to say what's going on in this advising and how does it explain whether the program works or not. And so I'm a qualitative researcher. My typical way of doing this would be interviews and focus groups, maybe surveys. I'd put it on a computer-assisted qualitative data analysis software and by hand choose chunks of texts and assign codes and work from open to axial to selective to core codes. I wasn't going to do that here. My data set was nearly 1 million text messages. And so Matthias asked me before we started, how did I get into this? And the answer is I had a data set that had the answers that could not be handled in the typical way. And in fact, text mining also allowed us to do a rigorous, replicable kind of batch coding job in which we could go back and forth from the group results back to the individual student voice. And I'll talk a little bit more about how that happens. So they basically got over 15 months, they got 18 messages. And this shows that the messages were customized to the assumed, the normative calendar of college testing and college choice application, financial aid applications, choosing a college and matriculating at a college. And one thing that we found and that the literature is clear about is that that ideal thing is not necessarily low-income students follow, and that's part of the problem. So you can see these were the kinds of messages. So each of the message flows, we called it, and they were approximately once a month, sometimes more frequent, would start with an automated message that everybody got but would have your name, so it was personalized. And then and ask for something very specific back, and then the students would engage in individualized texting back and forth with their advisor. All this is the treatment group. And so, and sometimes the automated messages would be stratified, conditioned, for instance, on whether College Board had told us a student had already taken the SAT or signed up for it. But in general, everything started off with customized and then went into individual. And then I should say that at the very end, message 18 was a set of evaluation text messages that each batch of, say, 2,500 students got a specific question, and that was the closest we got to a survey. And interestingly, it just reinforced the idea that that would not have been a good way to get information about what was going on, because we had a very low response rate. We learned a few interesting things, but it was really not usable in terms of any generalizability. Here just is an example of a screenshot of one of the text message exchanges. I'll be quiet for just a second and just let you kind of skim. The student responses are in green here, and the students anonymized. Zoe Bergstrom was the advisor. You can see just from looking at this that the advisor was talking a whole lot more than the student, and we did indeed find that. You can also see, well, what can you see? You can see that the exchange starts with an automated message that contains some information, a specific prompt, short, specific, and the student did text back, but with short responses and then dropped off when prompted for an action at the end. The student apparently knows that the FAFSA form has something to do with financial aid, thinks she's done it, but probably didn't, because that doesn't happen in the junior year, probably doesn't understand, which we found that the FAFSA is not equivalent to financial aid. The student doesn't remember the website or the saved information from when she did do the FAFSA forecaster. She responds to the question, what colleges are you interested in, with a kind of nutso college list, a mixture of flagships in two completely different regions, a regional and a community college. All right, so how would you get to this across 35,000 students? How do you capture what is happening in a rigorous and generalizable way across hundreds of thousands of student text messages? Especially because there's no indication here that if she texted back, but also she's in text message mode. If she had texted back, she might have texted back IDK, I don't know, or oh, with two exclamation points, or thanks with a question mark, or I have a question. All of that would be kind of standard for the text messaging, particularly for this age group. I won't even get into emojis. So, so here were my research questions. What are they talking about? What do they need? What's causing them problems? And then this last one, how variable and individualized, because College Board was deeply interested in automating this whole thing, this individualized advisors working full time to respond to messages was expensive, even though all of this is way less expensive than doing college prep or after school programs or other kinds of additional scholarship funds. So how variable and individualized are these communications? Do we really need individualized, fully individualized two-way texting? So we played around with all sorts of stuff. We didn't use all the capacities of text mining, but you know, the typical way to carry out text mining is with R or Python. I, as is as is usual, typical among qualitative researchers, no, neither. And that would have been quite a detour to get to the text mining potentials. So I investigated canned text mining programs and ended up with a text mining program called WordStat, put out by a Montreal company called Provalis. Went through a multi-day training program to do them, to learn how to do it. So my data source was 840,000 non-automated texts from advisors. So this is a WordStat output. Don't get too excited about this because we didn't end up concentrating on it. We did not use all the capacities of text mining or the WordStat program itself. We were not, most unfortunately, sadly, we were not able to do predictive analyses of individual student level outcomes as compared to the text content, because the College Board wouldn't allow us to integrate administrative and text message data. They care, understandably, deeply, deeply about confidentiality of individual student level data. We did some exploratory analysis with dendrograms to explore relationships among words and concepts, retrieve text segments, clusters of words and phrases, played around with heat maps, bubble charts, proximity plots, other ways of visualizing data and relating categorical data like time or subgroups with our unstructured texts. So for instance, this is just one example. You can see that a bunch of financial aid kind of terms occur, and parents are related when students are talking about paying. And then you see some kind of what we characterized as degree of vagueness or clarity among students associated with their understanding of financial aid, which parenthetically was so bad that we stopped using the word financial aid because they didn't understand the difference between scholarships, loans, grants, etc. And then you see that little thing with the funny symbol off on the bottom. That was, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, that was a variable for which we had made some sort of rule in our categorization dictionary. Which brings me to, so what did we do? And it could be that this is really so elementary for many people. It could be completely novel for others, but I'll go through it. These are the standard text mining steps. You start by establishing the body, the corpus of your text. So in this case, it was all the non-automated texts that were produced by the text messaging platform that we used called Signalvine. We divided them into the ones that were introducing the topic, which were automated or semi-automated, and then the student responses and the manual advisor responses. And today I'm just talking about the student responses, and that was about 340,000 student text messages. We sorted them by message number. So again, we had 18 messages sequentially over 15 months, and then imported them into the software program. The next thing that everybody has to do is the equivalent of cleaning your data or getting it ready, pre-processing, it's called in text mining. The program itself identifies distinct words, and we worked, partly the program did it, partly we did, to shorten words so that lemmatization, I think you know what that is. And then the program had a standard stop word or exclusion list, because you really don't care how many times the word "the" appears. But there are also words that we didn't care about or we wanted to exclude, that like the name of the advisor, for instance. So we customized that. And then, and this is what I'll mostly talk about, we ended up doing a lexical analysis, a deductive analysis, through developing our own categorization dictionary. And the way that we did that is we had the program, then the program forms a giant matrix of all the words or the phrases that we've identified in our dictionary. And it tells us about the frequency and And then we created a list in which we categorized basically into buckets, exactly the way that you would do axial and selective coding, um, into categories. And as we were doing this, we were going back and forth between what the categories were according to what we'd specified in our dictionary, what the frequencies had been generated automatically, to the keywords in context. You can go back and forth and look at actually the quotations to see what you've got, and you keep refining it. You specify, you need to do some disambiguation, because you need to, for instance, know the difference between, I think I'm interested in going to Illinois State, and I might want to go out of state for college. Those are different uses of the word state. And we needed to specify rules for non-contiguous words that were meaningful phrases. So you can't use the word don't or no. You need to, if you would set a rule that if don't was within, I don't remember exactly, 3 words of no, then it was classified as don't know, or now I know. So you can see how you go back and forth to make the dictionary entries. And many of you have used or will use existing dictionaries that are on the market, most notably sentiment dictionaries that have gone through these steps, and then can be used on a corpus of text to indicate positivity and negativity, for instance. But we were going from scratch to figure out a dictionary that would capture these college access things. So we did this deductive analysis. We then also did an unsupervised topics extraction, in which the computer extracted topics by looking itself at the coexisting words and sets of words. So they call that feature extraction in WordStat. And then we used things like the dendrograms or the network graphs, kind of like I showed you an example. And I'm going to show you an example first of the inductive one, and then show you kind of why it's not as good as what we found in the deductive, but then we compared them as one of our forms of validation. And if you're looking for all these steps, the top is very standard. Exactly how we did deductive versus inductive validation, we made up. I don't know if anybody else has done that, but I will say that I've been requested to share the dictionary with other researchers. So, so this kind of thing doesn't have to be done and shouldn't be done by each individual. A field can begin to develop, a subfield can begin to develop categorization dictionaries that are used across corpi of texts in a given area. So this gives you an example of the principal components that the machine, this is the inductive, came up with. So you'll see message 1, which is basically, hi, I'm your advisor, remember me, and it's probably time to think about registering for the ACT or the SAT. So you can see that the 2 major things that people talked about was, hey, thanks, happy to have you, and talking about the SAT. But you'll see it in message 4. That was about where you're going to go to college. So it's moderately interesting or helpful, but kind of brute strengthish. And so it gives you an idea, a quick and dirty idea of what's in there. But it was by no means, it's not really helpful to us to know that a message about FAFSA, that people are mostly talking about FAFSA, it helps you know they're on topic. But also, if you look at the percentages, there's already an indication that there's an incredible amount of variability. People are talking about way more than the topic of the conversation. So, so the general flow of the messages seems to work. And then what we did is we compared our categorization dictionary results to this, and I'll tell you how that came out. So here is an example of our categorization dictionary. This is the whole dictionary in terms of the core and selective codes, but the stuff in italics are just examples. So you'll see we had, and so let me talk about how we got to this. We began with focus groups with the advisors. And we repeated that at periods through the first 6 months of the intervention. We were saying, what are you seeing? What are the issues? What are students discussing? And what words or phrases might we look at in the texts to see examples of what it is you're seeing? So we started with the people on the ground. And then we did this just brute strength program frequency. What are the words and phrases that are occurring the most? The topics extraction, and then we did expert review by college access people, school counselors, and higher education people. And we came up with these categories and terms. And the kind of state of the art is that you've got a good categorization dictionary when you have classified at least 80% of the words and phrases in a corpus. And so we reached that. And then we compared them to the inductive, the topics that had been extracted. And we found that there was about a 95% overlap in terms of all the categories in the topics were covered. We had like, I don't know, 4% that weren't covered. And it turns out those were in the very last message. And we just hadn't gotten there yet when we did our categorization dictionary. We probably should have added another category called matriculation tasks. So those were things like registering for classes and buying textbooks and contesting, finding a place to live. So those weren't categorized and probably account for much of the 20% of the words and phrases that were not covered. So this is, you can see the kind of way it goes, and you can see the asterisks show lemmatization. You can see that it's phrases, and you can also see, and this came straight from You Aspire, they said, when someone says, okay, they may or may not understand what's going on. If they say, okay, or I get it, or oh, with an exclamation point. So we were able to see, because sometimes they said people are just being polite. So those were some of the things that we got, and you can see them here. Okay, and here's just one message. And you can see where they got better and better at the messages. Do you know the deadlines for the colleges you apply to? They tried to make that first automated message as simple as could be. So a student replies yes, and you say, okay, let's talk about application dates. They respond no, and they say, that's okay, I can help you. What college is your first choice? They don't say, do you have any questions? That's deadly. In this method, you really need to elicit very specific responses. So you can see, as should be, that most students, most of the responses, or the majority of those people who responded, did give college names. But you can also see the variability here, that people are still talking about testing, or our financial aid. Relational are things relating to thank you, or I appreciate it, or personalization are this is my own issue, like my parents won't let me leave, move away for college, or problems or concerns could be I don't even know where to start, or so you begin to get this kind of thing. And then you look across And this is not the complete, um, this is not the complete set of categories, but that would be too big to show. But the main ones. So TF IDF, you probably know, is term frequency inverse document frequency, and it's a weighting algorithm that accounts for uh, words and phrases that are hugely prevalent in a corpus of documents. For us, we had done the categorization dictionary so carefully that this was not very different than the percentages of responses in a certain category. So just forget TF IDF if it's not something you're familiar with here. So you'll see that navigating processes, and if you recall from the dictionary, which you probably don't, deadlines, application processes, eligibility, online processes, how do I get my recommendations, how do I get my transcripts, was the main thing throughout. And certainly once beginning in message 4, they started actually applying and thinking of specific ones. Financial was the major thing at the end, and not really at the beginning. College names, you would want that when they were doing the list. Relational at the beginning and end were quite big as you were starting to kind of develop some sort of warm talking back and forth between and thanking the person. Personalization was significant throughout, but mostly people were using this advising for very specific instrumental purposes. How do I, when do I, what do I do about this? Who do I talk to about that? And you can see that all these things were being used. Okay. And then I'm rounding the corner, and I know you'll have questions, but we also were able to do some crosstabs with categories, and this is just an example of looking at whether the content was different for people who engaged heavily in texted back a lot with their advisors versus ones who were in the middle and low engagers. And it was a problem in this intervention, and as they've discovered in such interventions overall, and we're starting to get a number of them around the country, that people don't engage or they drop off. And so this was done with a K cluster of looking at the number of characters and the number of times and the number of messages to which a student had responded. So the specific thing we looked at is there more relational content according to engagement? And indeed there was. So you can see that the high engagers started off with a little bit more engagement relationally, and it just built over time as opposed to the low and moderate ones. And I did also do some focus groups with students, and we saw that happening. So one student said, I've never met my advisor. We've only talked by text, but I feel like that person's got my back and is my friend. And another person said, oh, wait, I thought I was talking to a robot, which is a real issue to convince them that you're a human. And then rather than a chat box. And someone else said, well, I just used them as little reminders to make sure I was on track. I wasn't trying to make friends with my advisor. So the conclusions from the study were that students can develop a relationship with advisors over text, and the content shows that. But it only happens in some circumstances, and the question is how to increase that. That students, as I said, are negotiating processes and tasks. This is a very kind of get things done, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it's not the place to decide whether you want to go to college or whether you might want to major in engineering, or your dad wants you to do this. That kind of counseling stuff really wasn't happening too much. some of the personalization was important, though. People who couldn't get tax information from their non-custodial parent, or were an emancipated minor, or a documented student, they really needed specific advising. There was great variability in the timing of what students talked about in the topics. As I said, there's special situations, troubleshooting. Sorry, College Board, this is not able to be automated. It should not be. And then the last thing, what I just talked about, the high engagers using the texting differently than others. So how can we engage the advisees? So this is my visual metaphor for the overall finding, that the college access process is like a minefield of pebbles for these students. No problem too small to take the whole process down. That you don't know that you need to go back to the SAT website and get your SAT sent to a new school to which you're applying. You are audited, that's not the word, but verification is made of your FAFSA because you have apparently two last names as a Latinx person. And the bureaucracy at the very end, after you've been accepted to college and have a financial aid award, stops you. So it's a very complicated process. We did not find, oh, wow, if we could just solve this. We found that there are barriers, problems, misunderstandings at every level, which brings me to my last point, which is, so did it work? Yeah, no, it did not. After all this, there was no difference in the college outcomes between the control group and the treatment group. I will leave us with a tiny bit of hope, however, because we had an arm of this study that for which text mining was not appropriate, with 8 school districts and another 70,000 students in Texas, in Austin and Houston area. And in that case, the text messages came from the student's own school counselor in their high school. And the counselors stayed over the summer, were paid to be over the summer. And the purpose of those text messages was to give information, but also to invite students to come visit them. They did find a small positive result from text messaging coming from someone who was in your own world, a hybrid, as it were, between text messaging and being able to talk to a real person who was in your community. And that's pretty much where the field is now going, largely as a result of studies like this, and this one in particular, to understand that two-way texting from a professional, but someone that you don't know, does not seem to be effective, much less a silver bullet for increasing college access in underrepresented populations. So I'm going to stop there and let you all talk. I'm interested in your responses, reactions, and questions.
Thank you so much. So please, questions also in the chat. There are questions and somebody's more comfortable chatting or writing, you can send a text message.
And just remember, if you're a quantitative person, just imagine how uncomfortable I felt addressing all you methodologists. So can you see any way to use some of this in your work or with your students?
Yeah. So I think you explained everything extremely very good for a very broad audience, so from people who know a little bit about NLP, as well as people who are interested in the specific topic and research question. So we're giving people a little bit more chance. Otherwise, of course, I have like 10 different questions. I think Laura has a question.
Yeah. Hi, Karen. Great job. Thank you. What would you have needed to, I guess, to make the whole process easier for you? What kind of training would you have needed? Would you taken that training? Would you have realized early on that you needed that kind of training?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it really relates to how we prepare our students to do
Yeah.
such work. This was kind of like the equivalent of learning SPSS, but not knowing how it works under the hood. And also, oops, sorry, I think that might be me. And not knowing all the affordances of text mining. So having kind of taught it to ourselves, and the training was useful that Pravalis gave, and they give some support. It would have been helpful to have coursework. It would have been helpful to do this with a data mining specialist, computer scientist. I think that's that kind of partnership between the content specialists and the qualitative quantitative people. We had the qualitative quantitative, but we lacked that. Nobody knew how to do this in our team, this text mining stuff. And in kind of outside of people like you and Matthias, I think most of us in education are just starting to do this, which reminds me, I actually have one more slide to show of some readings, and you'll see they're all quite recent. Ours was one of the very first outside of computer science and statistics. Can you think of anything else, Laura, that you would add?
You're muted.
Yes. I've got a dog that is likely to bark any second.
So
You know, we're starting, we're writing a proposal right now for a new data science master's degree in Mesa. It's led by Mandy and Matthias and myself, even though I don't really know what I'm doing. But it occurred to me that it would be important to hear what you would have needed to know for this to have been easier for you to tackle. So that was where my question came from.
Yeah, and I really feel like I didn't know everything it could do. I would have set up the data differently. I would have written the grant differently. Like, it was a great disappointment not to have the administrative data and be able to look, for instance, were high engagers more likely to go to college, or were people who had more relational content, or people who talked about financial aid at the beginning, were they more likely to end up in college? Those kinds of predictive questions. And on this slide, Lily Fessler did a little bit of that. We're still kind of in this set of college access text mining studies, pretty primitive in terms of, so Lily, I think in that study was looking at if the advisor said a certain kind of thing, was the student more likely to respond? And this last one, Kim et al., is looking at engagement and the conditions for engagement.
Right.
And Anglin et al. Were looking at the fidelity of implementation of programs with scripts from an intervention.
Okay.
And then the only one that's not a text messaging one, the Avery et al., is actually the paper that reports on the outcomes of DIMES, including the Texas condition.
Okay. Okay.
So maybe we can share the slides or the references later. We can just distribute that or also make available.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
extremely interesting. Actually, also along the same lines. So you said you would have designed the study differently. So that's exactly what we feel, that this learning process is extremely interactive. That when we learn about what kind of data we could be collecting, if we only would have known what kind of methods there are, or the other way around, what kind of methods we might need if we have these kinds of complex data. What my question was also, you talked about the different context variables you might want to have or would have liked to have and would have been able to do more. Did you was there anybody who was looking at how well the advisors were doing? For example, you showed us this one example where the advisor was really highly interactive, but the student was not so interactive. But then there might be other advisors who were different, who might not be as proactive or something like that. Was there any way to also analyze their text messages, or would that be in the second paper?
Yeah, that would be another analysis, but it would be fabulous, for instance, to be able to look at, so there were about 20 advisors. It would be very interesting, and I've done this in other studies, to look at the outcomes of a particular advisor's caseload.
Mhm.
And then go back and try to figure out what it was in the advising that was working better. And then the other thing that I was asked to do, but ran out of time and actually didn't know how to do it, would be to look at not the advisor and the advisee text separately, but at the interactions and as a set. And I'm sure that could be done.
Yeah.
And I don't know how to do it. I didn't know how to do it.
But this is a very rich database. Who owns that database? Because there's, for example, there are, well, depending on who owns it and who has the money, there are Kaggle competitions. So there are sometimes data like this are being published, anonymized, of course. But there's a website, Kaggle, that actually hosts competitions around these types of data. Then people can just come being crowdsourced and analyze the data for a specific purpose, for example. So you can actually...
Yeah, that's a dream. And I think College Board owns the data. And in fact, it was kept on secure machines at the Center for Education Policy Research at Harvard. I could only use it at Harvard in that secured place. So.
Oops. Karen is frozen. I think we have a technical difficulty on. Oh, is it only my machine? Oh, Karen is frozen, it seems. Okay, that's awkward. Okay.
Yes, she's frozen on mine as well. Oh, I think she's gone.
No, she's there, but without a camera.
Oh.
Okay, so let's see whether she can come back. So I think this was a very interesting talk, actually. Oops, I think she's gone. Ah, you're muted.
Yeah, I had to re-enter.
Okay. So, yeah, thank you very much for this additional information about the data. Of course, it's always a question how you can even publish stuff like that, because it's highly personalized.
It was completely de-identified. I feel like it was an excess of caution, but it wasn't my choice.
I think we lost Martin, who had a question. He also might have had technical problems.
I'll also say that in higher education, well, in K-12 as well, there's a tremendous amount of data that can be scraped from the web. For instance, people are looking at racialized aggressions and microaggressions in social media.
Yeah.
You know, we've got an epidemic of mental health struggles among college students, and looking at social media around that. Certainly instructional stuff, and looking at that papers, applications, transcripts of meetings. I mean, there's endless data if we can train ourselves and our students to use it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's part of the idea of this data science masters, that we are more and more confronted with very unstructured but huge amounts of text data, and that just has to be processed in some way. And we have to understand those methods, because people will go out and make all kinds of claims about what they can or cannot do. And it's good if education also has answers there and can respond to these sometimes outrageous claims what one can do. And I think your study is a very good example there, that you can make the case good based on what I've seen. You can't just automate stuff. You have to have it highly individualized. You can't just set a primitive chatbot and replace individual advisors with that. Are there other questions?
Karen, I have some detailed questions related to this data mining. When you studied this, because there are many areas you do research in higher ed, and this college access is just one particular area you study. And for among all of these different apps and text mining domain area, why do you choose college access as the one area you work on? That's one thing I want to, learn about your whole text mining journey and using data mining to do research. That's one thing. And the second thing is, in your team, when you work on this, from beginning, you don't know anything about data mining, text mining, and what team members you need to have have each specialized roles in developing this whole research. I know you have your own content domain area you are very familiar with, and to do the text mining, how did you at the very beginning know this database and to find information from this particular database, or a specific series of data source or app? We have different ways to do text mining. You can also do online or the website text scraping, data scraping to do all of that. And will that be also part of this database text mining process in the future, that you will also get information from open source web application files, and then to do the data scraping? And because in the team you need people who know, you yourself are content domain area, and there are qualitative researchers to know about, survey of focus, all of that, and to know what are the specific areas. We ask detailed questions to get the tokenized words, all of those detailed information, to extract them, to categorize them, to continue, all what you described in the process. Do you have other team members? You mentioned you want to collaborate with the computer scientists. Do they join at a later stage, or do they join at the very beginning, or statistician? Or
So let me try to remember your questions and do them in order. The first, with college access. So throughout my career, I've studied people across transitions into, through, and out of higher education, and have moved from kind of basic research about what are those transitions like for different kinds of students and what are their outcomes, to studying schools and school networks, to studying problems, to studying solutions. So I'm at the point of my career where we're studying interventions to try to big scalable interventions to try to make a difference in all these problems that I've been one of many people looking at over the decades. So college access is and I use college access broadly because last I looked, if you're in the lowest income quartile, you're about 11% of that group ends up with a bachelor's degree, which is terrible. We have a problem with beginning college but not finishing it among all socioeconomic groups in the US. But this is a real problem, and we're all talking about the survival of higher education and the demographic cliff of the coming very fast lower number of 18-year-olds, because that birth cohort is smaller. Add in COVID related and other economic problems in higher education. Well, I just heard in Japan, they're proposing to close 300, half of their universities in Japan because of birth cohort problems. You have high debt, you have people who are starting college and not finishing. Only about 60% of people who start a 4-year degree finish it. And this is a problem both for those individuals who end up with no degree debt and also for society in terms of the human resources that we need and equality of opportunity, equity of opportunity. So college access is where it is. And so, so I am now more and more working as a collaborator with big quantitative policy folks to figure out the kind of mechanisms and conditions underlying what they're finding. In terms of web scraping, and then I'll get back to the team piece, that's exactly what I mean by looking at social media, for instance. That's just one looking at public social media or other kinds of things. Peer culture in particular is hugely important for college students, and we as researchers have very little access to it. So web scraping, I think, is definitely a major new frontier. I've been in the looking at technology assisted interventions, and that's where we get our text. And then the last thing is the team. I didn't have the people I needed on the team because none of us knew what we were doing, but you need someone who knows text mining. You need somebody who knows data management of big systems, a mixed method person, and you need it at the beginning stage because you need that expertise when you're designing your study as well as throughout.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Any other questions? We're 1 minute over time, but maybe a short question. Nobody else has questions.
Well, I'll put my email in the chat, and you're completely welcome to contact me. And I see we've got some young people here, and this is a really exciting opportunity for you to take forward. And I'm delighted that BC is going to start